Edition. I'm Melissa Lang, Gene Chizik, Matt Stinchcomb. Stinch, usually we're on a game sidelines together. This is weird,
I'm usually
Coach.
watching you guys. I know. I'm listening, right?
It's a nice little reunion, but we're less sweaty, which is great.
That's true. Or wet when it's raining like crazy.
This is
you had
true.
A couple of those.
We had a lot of rain games this year, but we have bowl games to talk about. 9 SEC teams making it to the postseason. We got to start with LSU, the #1 seed in the college football playoff, on their way to playing for a national championship.
We've been in the gym.
To get to where you want to go, it seems like you have to go undefeated.
Touchdown, Tigers! Touchdown, Tigers! Lost the football, picked up by the Tigers. Who will stop us now?
LSU's defense comes up big.
LSU looks unstoppable.
LSU scoring so many points so quickly.
There is one team in the country that has been battle tested, and that's LSU.
Who won't stop us now? Who won't stop us now?
So rivalry is highest level.
Hand to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Stiff arms a man, gets to the 5, breaks through, stays upright, into the end zone! Tigers win! Tigers win!
It's been 8 years coming.
Joe Burrow, straight shot to the end zone. Touchdown, LSU.
Joe Burrow, school record, 29 touchdowns in a season.
SEC record for most passing yards in a single season.
What a campaign by Joe Burrow.
Another Heisman-enhancing night.
LSU is the best team in college football right now.
Who won't stop us now?
The next step is beating Georgia.
Late pressure comes, Burrow spins away, runs back, has a man open, Justin Jefferson. How about Joe Burrow? LSU victorious, SEC champion.
Who won't stop us now?
They won an SEC championship, but Coach O said there is still work to do, and next up will be the Oklahoma Sooners. An interesting matchup because we have two quarterbacks who are extremely athletic, extremely talented when it comes to their arm, but we know a lot about Joe Burrow already. So let's talk about the other side. Jalen Hurts is a familiar face to this conference. Stinch, when it comes to stopping him and his athleticism when he takes off and runs, how do you do it?
Well, I know this. He's going to have a ton of confidence because he's never lost to LSU. He's never been a part of something like that, and he's had 3 cracks at it, and he's been very successful. But I think the biggest piece for Jalen Hurts is the evolution that he's experienced as a passer. That 1 year that he had at Alabama where he could actually be an understudy, I thought that was a brilliant move for him because he wasn't pressured to be something that he already was. He could work on becoming something more. And because of that, I think we have seen him be able to exploit that element of his game more so, albeit in a conference that lends itself to that. But when you look at what he has at receiver and within this offensive philosophy, CeeDee Lamb, I think, being one of the better playmakers in all of college football, you couple that with a run threat coach, that's a pretty lethal combination, and we've seen it out of Jalen Hurts before.
Yeah, there's no question. And Jalen Hurts is their leading rusher. He has over 1,200 yards rushing. Some of those are design run stints. Some of them are him just kind of being innovative in the pocket and bringing the ball down and scrambling for extra yards. We saw that in the Oklahoma State game. He scrambled for a 28-yard touchdown. But you mentioned something about CeeDee Lamb. This guy's dynamic. And LSU has to do something to be able to take away the run game, have an extra guy for the quarterback because Jalen Hurts is able to run the ball. And then they also have to have a plan for this dude right here, CeeDee Lamb. This guy averages 21 yards a catch, Stench. 21 yards every time he makes a reception. What are they going to do? Are they going to take Stingley, travel him all over the ballpark to try to figure out how to neutralize CeeDee Lamb? But you know when you have a guy that's caught 1,200 yards worth of footballs and he's averaging over 20 yards a catch, you got to have a great game plan for not only him, but how they can run the football as well, along with being Jalen Hurts being that much of a threat with his feet.
Stingley also with 6 interceptions, which leads the SEC. Looking at what LSU has seen, though, this year when it comes to Oklahoma's CeeDee Lamb, does going against wide receivers like what Alabama has and the rest of the SEC help when it comes to this matchup, or is CeeDee Lamb that far ahead of everybody? Because, I mean, we know we're going to see him playing on Sundays, but how does that compare to what they've seen so far?
Well, I do think from a talent standpoint, when you talk about CeeDee Lamb, somewhat of a singular talent, take nothing away from their wide receiver core, LSU sees some pretty good receivers in practice every day. That's the other piece of it, too. I think partly why you can say that this defense, this pass defense for LSU could perform at a very high level. because they can kind of sharpen their edge all week long. It's not as if you're asking your look squad or even your own offense, hey, could you be something that you're not, because we've got an Oklahoma squad that can really open things up in the passing game. Not necessarily the case. CeeDee Lamb, a very talented receiver, there's no doubt. So is Jamar Chase. So is Justin Jefferson. When you look at some of these guys, really, really talented. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Alabama's wide receiving core, even with an injured Tua Tagovailoa, that was a pretty formidable opposition to go up against for this LSU pass defense. This won't be the first time that they've seen an offense that's as prolific as Oklahoma's.
Yeah, and look, when you play Oklahoma, you go into the game as Dave Aranda and you say, this is the guy I have to be able to double when I need to double him, right? So do you put Stingley on him? Do you put Grant Delpit over the top? They didn't have that luxury with Alabama. So they've played some pretty good ones in Devontae Smith and Jerry Jeudy, and I could go on and on and on. But the bottom line is, in this game, the two things you have to do is you can't let the two things that Oklahoma's offense does best beat you. What is that? Quarterback run game, take CeeDee Lamb out of the game. They have played some very talented receivers this year. This is not the first. CeeDee Lamb is great. He's no greater than those guys at Alabama. And you mentioned it, Stinch, no greater than the guys they practice against every week. But they will have to have a very solid game plan, Alyssa, because you can't just focus on one element. They can throw it and they can run it. And, oh, by the way, Lincoln Riley is one of the best game planners in college football.
Whatever allows us to see like 100 points scored during this game, I don't care, because I have a feeling that we're going to see a whole lot of touchdowns. We'll talk about this one coming up a little later in the show, but we do have a couple of more SEC Big 12 matchups going down in the postseason, starting with the Academy Sports and Outdoors Texas Bowl. We'll see Oklahoma State taking on Texas A&M. Texas A&M, coach, is a team that just now is starting to get their run game together towards the end of the season, but Oklahoma State has a pretty good running back in Chuba Hubbard, too.
Yeah, Chuba Hubbard's gone for 4 different games over 200 yards. Yes, Texas A&M, they've gotten their run game going a little bit later in the season, but they will have to be able to run the ball to win this game.
To the All-State Sugar Bowl, we'll see Georgia taking on Baylor. This is an interesting matchup, Stinch, a Georgia team that's looking to try to end the season on more of a positive note.
No doubt. And who's going to participate in this game, I think, will play a key role in this one, and how motivated they are. Clearly an issue for Georgia last year. In this same game versus Texas, this year they get a physical Baylor team that gave Oklahoma all they wanted in the 2 times that they had to face off.
Staying with that Georgia game, what are they doing over the next couple of weeks after the SEC championship to make sure that, 1, they're healthy, 2, their heads are on right to try to go out and get a bowl win, something they weren't able to do last year, Coach?
Yeah, we think that's probably the biggest thing that people are going to look at. They're going to look at the Sugar Bowl last year against Texas, and they're going to say, wow, is this same football team going to show up? Because if you remember correctly in that game, Georgia got beat in every way, shape, and form. They were out physical. They were out tough. The last, probably 7 or 8 minutes of the game, they tried to make it a game, but it was too late at that point. And really, it comes down to, in these bowl games, and Stinch, as a player and as a coach, how is your team mentally approaching the game? Because this day and age with the college football playoff, for teams like Alabama, teams like Georgia, whose fan bases expect to get there every year, what's it like when you're not in it? What's it like when you're going just to play for the pride and another game and just for the love of the game and to end the season on a positive note? Last year, it did not happen well.
It's big for Georgia, though. This is a young Georgia football team still, and they're going to get some pieces of it back. I'll be shocked. You look at a Jake Fromm, he's going to play more football at the collegiate level. I'll be shocked if that isn't the case going forward. Maybe not true for some other contributors. There's no doubt about that. But for them to be motivated, you've got a perfect case study. Just harken back to 1 year ago, this exact same spot. And as you mentioned it, Coach, you can't decide that you want to play after the ball's been kicked off. It's too late. These teams are plenty good enough. You got to respect your opponent, and they should in Baylor. What happens is how are you approaching your preparation? You have to want to win that game in bowl practice.
That's right.
Before you go to bowl site. That's where they didn't do a season ago. They're too busy moaning about not making the playoffs. Well, you're not going to make it this year. You shouldn't have made it this year. Now you have to earn your way to a victory in what should be an important ball game for you, especially given how young that roster is.
Yeah.
All season long, I feel like people talk smack about my conference plays defense, our conference scores more touchdown, this conference this. Now in the postseason, we finally get to see those matchups with conferences going against each other. When you look at the Big 12 and you look at the SEC, Are there any similarities? Are there any differences? Anything that excites you about this kind of matchup?
I think it's a tale of two conferences. You got one that to me is a dominating line of scrimmage conference, Alyssa. I mean, you look at the SEC, it's born and raised on winning the line of scrimmage and being physical with those big guys up front on both sides of the ball. And what has the Big 12 typically been? Let's spread the ball, spread our receivers from sideline to sideline, make defenses play in space, make defenses defend 53 1/3 yards wide and vertically down the field. Two different types of leagues. So this is a great matchup to see exactly, where are we?
Yeah, and you look at the proximity, right? The SEC, ACC, and the SEC Big 12, even they have some cross-pollination. We already talked about Jalen Hurts, James Lockhart, a former Texas A&M guy playing for Baylor. So you've seen some of these individual talents anyway being transplanted into a different conference. So there's some level of familiarity, but there's no doubt a contrast in styles when you look at the two conferences.
The SEC is favorited in all their postseason matchups. Do you guys think they go 3-0 against the Big 12?
I don't. I think they drop one of them.
Okay.
And part of that's a function of how many players do you have that are aspirant to the NFL,
Right.
that sort of thing. If they're dialed in, maybe not, but I think there's definitely a chance to drop
And
one.
I think Texas A&M Oklahoma State is going to be a really interesting matchup because of the way Texas A&M ended the season. It was not good, and Oklahoma State is extremely explosive. We'll see how that one pans out.
I'm sure Aggie fans will be packing the house out in Houston for that game. Plenty more to come.